session this afternoon at the RBHR Forum. I'm really delighted that we're all here and that we managed to meet despite COVID-19 and all the travel restrictions. It's not quite the same, but I think it's a very nice forum as well, and it gives a lot of opportunities to people to join this. My name is Ines Kempfer. I am the Executive Director of the Center of Child Rights in CCR-CSR. Just very quickly, that you know who we are. We are a social enterprise that has been funded by Save the Children, and for 10 years now we have been working to understand the impact of business on children's rights and how we can turn a potential negative impact into a positive one. As such, I'm of course really happy to facilitate the session today, during which we will hopefully have a very lively discussion on the role of business mitigating the impact on workers and their families during COVID-19. As you probably already saw on the program, there is a lot to say on this topic, and we really wanted to make sure that we have a wide range of voices today in this session. And so we actually have quite a number of people that will speak, and I'm certain that will make up for a really interesting discussion. I will give a very quick introduction just so that you know who's on the call and who is going to speak. We do have Mr. Alex Heikens. He is the UNICEF representative in Mongolia and will share his experience and his knowledge about the situation there. We also have Alice Young, who is the administration director at Golden Cup Printing, a factory in the south of China. We do have with us Mrs. Ellen Claire Mains. She leads the IFC Gender and Economic Inclusion Group, East Asia Pacific. There is also Sarmu, who is heading CCR-CSR's work in Myanmar. We do have with us Mr. Nguyen Xuyen Nguyen, who is the Secretary General of the Vietnam Chamber of Commerce and Industry, VCCI. Ms. Sarah Nips, the Regional Director at UN Women. Also with us is Riri Siti Malika, who runs the CCR-CSR program in Indonesia. And last but definitely not least, Mr. Tatsuya Hamada, who is the CEO of Mobicom Mongolia. So as you can see, a really interesting group. And I will, in my role as facilitator, obviously get a couple of moments to speak as well. So I will add in a few thoughts and reflections as well, but I don't want to go into a long introduction because I do think they'll have such interesting speakers. So I would like to dive in right away and maybe start with taking a look at what we know on the situation of the families and particularly of children in this time of COVID-19. There is quite a bit of information out there on the situation for children, and generally the picture of the impact of COVID-19 is not great. We have reports of increased domestic violence that obviously affects women, but also children, a widened education gap, with those children in less affluent conditions falling back even more than they might have already done before. We do have strong indication and suspicion that COVID-19 eventually possibly can lead to an increased number of children in child labor throughout the world. So on this rather bleak outset, maybe Alex, if you could share with us a little bit what UNICEF Mongolia has seen to be kind of the immediate and maybe longer term impact on children.
Yes, thank you so much, and hello everybody. Indeed, you are spot on. You are spot on in terms of the issues that we observed. The situation in Mongolia really started to unfold late January, where very strict social distancing measures were introduced. Immediately, schools were closed, kindergartens were closed. Basically, social life was closed, public life stopped, and all the borders were closed, and we more or less went into a full lockdown to prevent any possible outbreak. Now, that has been successful so far, which is of course, very good news for Mongolia, but at the same time, it also has come at a high price for children to start with, because also those consequences were immediate. Because indeed, immediately education stopped, and yes, online learning has restarted at some point, but there are serious issues and serious challenges. But also many kids were really relying on school lunches and lunches at the kindergartens, and that meant that also suddenly their nutritional situation was being affected. And of course, parents were really scrambling to figure out who is going to look after those children, because it's not supposed to be holiday. I need to go to work. So suddenly there were all kinds of issues in families to figure out how are we going to manage that with our children. And unfortunately, in many cases, children were and still are left home alone. Now, the issue is not only, it's for every child, it's a problem. The problem is for every child where parents are unable to make necessary arrangements to look after the children. Now, what you do see, of course, is that for poor families, the challenges are definitely much bigger. Because if you don't have enough funding, how are you going to then pay for the school lunches that they used to get at school, but now you have to cover it yourself? And even if you would be able to pay for the lunch for your child, who is at home to prepare that lunch? Then also the inequality around access to education is really problematic, of course, because not everybody has a good TV, has access to internet. So again, it's especially the poor kids who are being left behind and really struggling. And I think there we also see a serious risk that many children may not be going back to school after hopefully the school reopens again sometime after the summer break. And then finally, indeed, all those kids left home alone or left with people who may not necessarily be thinking about the best interest of the child has really put safety and security of children at risk in terms of abuse and exploitation, including online. And those are very, very serious issues. And in that context, even more so, it's children with disabilities that we are deeply concerned about.
Thank you so much, Alex, for these remarks, and very interesting to see. And I think it's throughout the region we have seen one of these issues that you just mentioned, of, for example, the access to internet, which is a question of access, but also the question of having a gadget. I think we've been in touch with a family where, when the dad left again for work, the only working device that was at home, that was his phone, was gone, and with it the child's ability to join a little bit, at least through the dad's smartphone, the lesson. Ellen, I know that from your work at IFC on gender and economic inclusion, you have some insight on how children and families in Asia Pacific region are doing. So would you like to share a little bit what you have observed in these last couple of months or weeks?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ines, for that. Similar to Alex, actually, we've observed in countries across the region, that imposed lockdowns have been put in place. There's been restrictions on gathering. Schools have closed. Kindergartens and daycare are no longer available. Business closures have been announced, and there's also been mandatory home-based work for a lot of different employees. And the impacts for children and families are many. Like Alex mentioned, we've seen an increase in care responsibilities, and this means that working parents are trying to juggle their childcare, the homeschooling and their work responsibilities. And what we're seeing is that women do carry much of this burden in terms of the care responsibilities. As well, we're seeing, as a result of the downturn in business, for many companies, employees are affected by job loss. They may be on unpaid or paid leave, and this reduction in income is really having a significant impact on cash flow and the ability of families just to meet their household expenses. And lastly, this is something you mentioned already, but we've seen an increase in domestic violence. Stay-at-home orders are forcing women to be at home together with their perpetrators, often under very stressful circumstances. And we know already that rates of domestic violence across the Pacific were high to begin with, at about two out of 3 women experiencing domestic violence. But reports indicate over this period that the rates of domestic violence have risen significantly, particularly over March and April.
Yeah, I think that is, thanks so much for sharing this, Ellen. And it's really more and more as we diving deeper, I think we see reports. We had indications from Europe and from the US, as well from China on this. Our team in China is working with migrant parents, and we had some very kind of insightful voices from the parents. Like actually one was a dad where he was just describing on the amount of stress he's feeling. So he's basically losing his income. He said his child who's supposed to study doesn't study, and he's like basically, and I'm just losing it. I'm sitting at home and I'm losing it. And he was actually then saying that he's using violence and beating up his child as a way of dealing with it. And so we've seen this really insight, which obviously doesn't in any way justify it, but it was just such a striking testimony of the immense pressure that the families have been under during these lockdowns. Luckily in China, it has released a little bit, but we know that for many countries that is still the situation. Sarmo, you're working for CCRCSR in Myanmar. You're managing our programs there, and you're in daily contact with some of the more vulnerable groups. Maybe can you tell us a little bit on how the Myanmar children are doing?
Yes, sure, Ines. So, but luckily we can say that in April and May is a vacation and summer vacation have fell in, so all of the schools are closed. But normally the school was open back in 1st June, but now it's delayed and the most places until 1st July. So, but and also that's why so we can say the children are affected by the school closures. And we can see that most of the children in Myanmar, so and homeschooling is not an optional, as they don't have it's difficult to get internet access and necessary gadgets. So that's why so it's the most of the children they are facing with that problem. And just for the families, so it's the COVID-19 is really hit them, especially for the migrant worker. So they cannot go back to their hometown because of the travel restriction, and some migrant, not only we can say in the migrant worker from the Thailand, they cannot come back to our country, and also not only in the broad, but also within our country, they're facing with that problem. And most of the workers, they are losing their job, and some even they are not losing their jobs. Their working hours are reduced, so we can see that there is a great challenges for the family. And then some vulnerable families, so they are we can see that in our child labor program, I can say like one of the case, this time is really difficult to find a job, so they need to struggle for that. And at that time, so last month, so we have affected by the storm, but it's not so much, but it's just for the vulnerable, so their house was really quite bad, so they affected with the storm and their house is damaged, so they could not affect on to rebuild their house. So at that time, because they are just daily wages workers, so they could not afford all that. But luckily, so we CRCSR, we have this kind of program to support for COVID-19 response. So that is really great that we can support that family to build their house, to rebuild their house on that. Yes.
So thanks so much for sharing this example. So you just mentioned how this family who has already been really poor is struggling and in this time. So what do you think are the factors that kind of decide the gravity of the impact? Or with other words, who do you see are the most vulnerable kind of groups of people that are exposed to the biggest risk in this crisis?
Yes. So the vulnerable during COVID-19 are those who already live in the most precious conditions before. So that's particularly true for the people doing just like an odd job worker, temporary worker, and people who live in a slum area. So they are exposed to a biggest risk because they don't have a daily income. And last, they are facing with a problem for surviving, such as food, and also they has a debt on that. So these workers do work for the local economy. Many are actually parts of our international supply chain. But because of their involvement in informal, so they are just hiring for the very factory for the temporary or just daily worker, or work from their own homes. so they have no security, and most relief measures do not apply to them because they are not officially hired on that. As common, many of these families are also part of a minority groups and would then impact even more. And on the other hand, we can see that some children, the school are closed, and we can see that some their parents lost jobs. So at that time, they need to support their parents with other ways, just like selling flour in the traffic and work at a tea shop during school close or something like that. So we can see that the risks are on that.
Okay, so there is actually this kind of increased risk that's because the parents don't have stable income anymore, that the children start to help out as well. Thank you so much, and I think some very good points also around minorities that are particularly at risk. Ellen, you mentioned just before that for one, women are very much affected because they take over additional care work. Do you see other tendencies or factors that you can see are kind of putting people in a high risk group?
Certainly. Firstly, in Fiji, around the same time as COVID hit, Tropical Cyclone Harold coincided with the lockdown. So this presented a real double blow for working families who are already struggling to cope with the impacts of COVID. And overall, we've seen women seem to be more affected overall by the job loss impacts. Women tend to be more overrepresented in vulnerable types of jobs, informal, low paying, low skilled, and this means that their jobs are often the first ones to be cut. We also see that women are often hired into sectors most impacted by the crisis, such as travel and tourism related services and hospitality, which makes them again quite vulnerable to job loss. And lastly, just because of the care responsibilities, women are more likely to be taking care of children as schools are closed, as well as looking after elderly and sick family members, and this makes them less available for work overall. So even though men are reportedly more impacted by the medical impacts of COVID, it would seem that women are more impacted from a job perspective.
Right. Yeah. Very, very interesting to point that out. Actually, that's thank you so much. And as we've seen, I think it's often somewhat told the story about the family who's been affected by a storm, and obviously when these two things come together, or two things like that come together, and these people are already often have been at the limit of poverty, and we can see that these things now really push them under that line into real precarious situations. Alex, you have a few seconds. We're a little bit delayed in our first sessions already, but we'll catch up. But you have a few seconds to maybe conclude this first round. You did mention some factors just very quickly before, like disability. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about that. We haven't looked at that aspect so far on what potentially can be a factor to kind of aggravate the crisis.
Yeah, I think children with disabilities, of course, is always a special group, and they need even more attention under the current circumstances. And for us, one top priority there is the education component, because everybody, of course, is jumping on the bandwagon of online learning, which is very, very much necessary, of course. But we also need to recognize that, for children with disabilities, you really need to bring it to the next level to make online learning work for them. And for them to sit behind a computer may not be far enough at all. So you do need to be much more clever than that, and also really look at offline opportunities as well to strengthen that. So I think children with disabilities in the context of education, that is a very serious concern. And then on top of that, of course, also when parents have to work, even more difficult for them is to find someone who can look after their child with a disability.
Yeah, thank you so much for pointing this out, Alex. I think it often gets forgotten when we talk about online learning and substitute. And I think, as you say, it's children with disabilities. I think even children with kind of minor learning difficulties can be very negatively affected if they don't get extra support in this time. So thank you so much. So in this, in the kind of second round, we want to talk a little bit more on the role of business. We've talked quite a bit now in this first section on how many of the kind of the impacts that we've seen and potential negative impacts are related to the fact that people are losing their jobs and livelihood. And I think business in this situation is in a very challenging situation or a special position, because on one hand, business itself is a victim of the COVID-19 crisis. Many businesses get the brunt of that crisis, but at the same time, this also puts them into a situation of a kind of increased potential responsibility. We have seen, Sarmu has shared a little bit from Myanmar on the difficulties there. We've seen that, I think it was already beginning of May, already 60,000 garment workers had lost their jobs, and it might be more by now. So really that the crisis can upend whole industry and or at least deeply impact whole industry. So I would like to turn to you, Win. You're the Secretary General of VCCI. What do you see for Vietnam? How has it affected businesses in terms of their profitability, but also in terms of their sustainability? Do we have Mr. Win?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's
Hi.
better now. Yes.
Yeah,
Thank you for inviting
perfect.
me. Yes. Yeah. I'm proud to say that Vietnam is one of the best countries, together with other countries in China, in dealing with COVID-19. Mm-hmm. But you may know, COVID-19, has become the most popular word all over the world, not only in Vietnam, and it has negatively impacted seriously on the business and productivity. It's narrow the market of the businesses, reduce the profit and the access to the resources, and some of you mentioned already the fluctuation of the labor, and the impact of the on economic stemming from COVID-19 is not uniform in all sector in Vietnam. Businesses in wholesale and retail trade sector have faced a reduction in demand due to the social distancing, and online shopping and the home delivery option compensate only to a limited extent loss in the main source of revenue in this sector. And the mandatory restriction to movement in Vietnam and the travel ban, adopted in other countries have caused a shock to the transport and storage and communication industry. And a similar mix of direct and indirect mechanism has created a collapse in economy activity, in accommodation, hospitality and food service sector, and tourism flow, both national and international was stopped, and in March and April and until now, which led to the revenue reduction of the tourism industry in Vietnam. And several segment of manufacturing sector are also severely affected. Some factory across manufacturing sector have stopped production in country that serve as the Vietnam principal import and export partner. So Vietnamese factory rely on import of components for the production cycle. Also the consumer in large market across Asia, European Union and the US are forced to lock down the consumption of imported goods. So it's reduced, result in the cancellation of order from Vietnamese factory. I want to share with you all, some finding of the survey that BCCI did during the last I think 2 months, the impact of COVID-19 on pandemic, on labor and employment among businesses in Vietnam. The survey was conducted in March, and we share with our partner and with the government, and I want to highlight some significant impact of COVID-19 on businesses through the survey with 700 businesses and business association in 46 cities in Vietnam. It's 83% of enterprises said the consequences of pandemic is to narrow the market, and the private sector has to have the most affected group, 85%, followed by foreign direct investment enterprises, 82%, and the state-owned enterprises with 69%. And nearly 92% of enterprises think that in 2020 the revenue is reduced compared to 2019, and approximately 30% said that they can only maintain their business production from 1 to 3 months, which obviously impact on job maintenance, stabilizing income, and welfare for employees. And from 10 to 50% of the labor reduction was observed in private enterprises in Vietnam. With the remaining employee, they show the low working spirit and anxiety of job, and income security, life of the family, working arrangement to balance their work and their family. So I think at the same time we are making the survey, to find out, not only to find out the solution and recommendation to the government and to the CEO and to the employer, but also we send out some recommendation on business sustainable development in medium and long term. And it is to find out that most of business show their commitment in sustainable development strategy in Vietnam, despite of short-term difficulty. Some of plans have to be modified due to the reduction in the budget of the running of the operation of the company. But they also the commitment of the company in Vietnam also show that they will further invest, not only on the measure that recover the economy, but also invest in the environmental and social activity. And this is the result of the lower business income, and the business need to spare particular budget to support the employees against the COVID-19. So that what has been, we want to share that, although it's difficult for the businesses, for the employer in Vietnam, but our survey show that, the commitment for, longer term, and and especially the commitment of the company that they are pioneering in business sustainable development. They want to be a good corporate partner of the government in dealing of the short-term difficulty, but also that the long-term and short-term. But a lot of member company of BCCI donated a lot. They cooperate with the government, and mobilize a lot of funding. I think that member of Vietnam Business Council for Sustainable Development, for example, all of them, they spend about, I think, over the last 4 or 5 months, they donated more than 100 billion of Vietnamese dollars to the vulnerable community and the employees of Vietnam. So that's what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vin. That I think was a really comprehensive overview on the situation in Vietnam, both about all these difficulties, but also giving at the end showing kind of like how business is committed. If we have time at the end, I will actually probably make an example of a factory that we've been working with in Vietnam that was doing exactly what you said and being really quite exemplary in how they tackle this. I would like to turn to Indonesia, but before I do, I want to make a quick remark, which I forgot to all the audiences that have joined us, which I'm so sorry I forgot to make at the beginning. So you do have the Q&A possibility, so you can put questions anytime. You can ask those questions either to one of the panelists or general. We will take those up, or some of the questions up at the end of the session. So we will have a Q&A at the end of the session, so you'll just have to be a bit patient, but you can ask your questions anytime. It might not be possible to answer all the questions, but we'll do our best to also get back to you. Sorry, that was just a quick interlude. But then, yeah, I would like to go to Indonesia. We have Riri here, who I know, as she's working with us, has been in contact very regularly in Indonesia with factory workers, but also workers in the agriculture setting. And I just wanted to ask you, what do you see as kind of the impact of the crisis on those workers, and what are the factors that potentially make them most vulnerable or exposed to that situation that during COVID-19?
Thanks, Ines. First of all, I would like to say that the situation that Vin explained in Vietnam is basically resembled the situation in Indonesia towards the factory that we work with. Like, we work with different types of consumer good manufacturers in Indonesia, but mainly they are garment factories and furniture factories. I would say that they share the same experience, that they are losing their international buyers. They got their order volume shrinked, but somehow the garment factories can keep up that we work with. I know that this may not the situation of all garment factories in Indonesia, but at least the factories that we work with, they can still run with 100% of their workers, at least until last month, because they managed to change the production to fulfill the request and the demand of COVID-19 situation, like producing hazmat suits and also masks. So they have better chance of survival. But different with the factory which produce furniture products, they are in a very poor situation right now. So they have to lay off like 45% to 90% of their workers, which definitely affect the situation of the workers that we work with, that we spoke with last month. And this is a very bad situation for the workers. And I would say that if we can share like the most vulnerable groups that were affected among the workers is basically the home weavers, like the home workers in a home setting, because they're casual workers. They work based on piece rate. So if the order of the furniture factories are shrinking, meaning that they are losing their job, they cannot produce stuff, they cannot make money. And this situation is very bad as well in the deeper supply chain, because we also in Indonesia, CSR works with the workers in raw material sites in some of the provinces in Indonesia, especially that they work in the natural fiber settings, and they really rely on their daily needs based on that work. So they are losing work now. They don't go to the forest to harvest rattan anymore, or the mothers and also the female workers not going to the collection point to wash and clean the rattan anymore, because they cannot sell their products to the rattan collectors. Let's say these rattan collectors also suffer because they don't know to which furniture factory basically they can sell their raw materials. So it's really bad in the deeper supply chain, because these people are really living day by day. So if they don't earn money today, they cannot eat tomorrow. It's kind of bad. And these workers also, like I spoke with one 60-year-old female rattan washer. She's she's basically a single-headed household and living far away from the children, and the children also have a very poor family background, so cannot support her. And usually when she wash rattan, like in the riverbank, she can earn around $4 US per day. But now, without the job anymore, she turned into other odd jobs like harvesting rice, basically everything that she can do to survive. And her income is reducing significantly, more than 50%, I would say. She only earned less than $2 per day now. And not to mention that she also lives with 2 grandchildren and jobless children, so she needs to really support the daily food intake, and it's very hard for them even to eat. It's very hard for the people, the workers who are in a deeper supply chain. So yeah, I would say that in normal days without COVID-19, even we can still see that many children supporting their parents, helping their parents in the work sites. And especially the children of landless farmers, the children of single-headed households, and the children with sick or disabled parents. And I cannot imagine their situation now. I'm very sure that the situation right now with the pandemic may even put these children in a worse possible situation right now. Yeah.
Thank you so much, really, for sharing this, because I think it gives us insight to something we often don't see. As you say there, you have to explain it very well. These are the farmers at the very end or at the very beginning of the supply chain, and that whole kind of breakdown of demand has impacted them so greatly, and obviously often kind of also remains unseen to our eyes. You have mentioned also how it hits in particular women in that situation, and I would like to turn to Sarah. From your perspective with UN Women, you probably have a very good sense of how this crisis and the economic crisis that comes with it impacts female workers in the region. So Sarah, over to you, if you can share a little bit.
Thank you so much, Ines. Yes, as several of the speakers have already highlighted, women do tend to be concentrated in some of the sectors that have been most severely affected. So I think we've mentioned already the garment sector, where hundreds of thousands of women across the region are currently either laid off or the factories are closed. Tourism, service industries, and I'd also really like to highlight as well the impact on the smaller businesses, because a lot of women, these are very, very important, as we know, in this region, and this is where a lot of women are working. They tend not to be obviously formalized, they may not be able to access social protection, and many of them are also focused on services, which have been particularly affected by this crisis. And there are really sort of strong gender factors that seem to make the situation of those women owning small businesses much harder. So, for example, with the women owners of small businesses that UN Women talked to, 50% of them reported that because of the childcare and the extra care work they have to do at home at this time, they actually have less time to do their business. So obviously, in what may already be a very small business with a limited cash flow, this is really quite devastating. And also, I think we're all aware, we're going through a kind of transformation now where we're all trying to be more digitalized, but very often it's women who suffer from a digital divide and may be much less likely to access technology. So again, one of the needs of these small businesses may be to somehow to try to bridge that gap, because at the moment they may be excluded from those opportunities that may exist in this crisis.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for this very good overview. And I think if we summarize what we have seen, I mean, with the struggles with the food and the economic struggles that come, these real life struggles for many of the workers, for, as you say, the particular small businesses, small entrepreneurs that are being touched in particular. I don't know, have you seen any we know that often in these situations, migrant workers or female migrant workers are particularly affected. Have you seen any data research around that topic?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are seeing huge impacts on migrant workers. So maybe I'm actually based in Cambodia at the moment. It's where I've been working for the last few years. I'm just transitioning into a regional role. And I mean, here in Cambodia, for example, we've seen over 100,000 migrant workers returning to the country. We know that on average, around 50%, slightly more of them will be women. And we are seeing them in the kind of situations that actually Riri was describing, of just having to find whatever alternative livelihood situation they can when they return to rural communities. Unfortunately, they're returning at the time that agriculturally there isn't so much to do. So they're in a very tough situation. And this is not only obviously a huge blow for them, but of course their remittances were supporting their families. And what we see here is in many cases they're also servicing debts for the family. So there are then issues potentially of rural families being at risk of losing their land or their homes because they have extensive debts. And once the person who was earning a salary in the family and bringing home a remittance is not able to do that, it has a very, very rapid and severe impact.
Yeah. Now, that's a very good point that you're bringing up. I was not that long ago talking to some researchers in Bangladesh who talk about the immense impact on the Bangladesh economy for not, already it's bad, but with COVID-19, but on top of that, not receiving those remittances from all the Bangladeshi foreign migrant workers, which puts so many family been poor and living in poverty before that, but just making it way worse and just so much harder. So, we've set this session up in a way that we don't totally despair amongst all these challenges, but hopefully from knowing these challenges and understanding these challenges really go towards finding ways that all of us in our different roles and situations can actually make a difference and hopefully in some way or another have a positive impact on these on the people who are most affected by this crisis. So in this sense, I would like to turn to Mr. Hamada, who is the CEO of Mobicom, to share a little bit what Mobicom has been doing in Mongolia in trying to support their employees and to tackle or to deal with all those challenges that we've discussed just now. Before you start, Mr. Hamida, just a quick note. I know that I've been told by our time checkers that we are a bit behind schedule, so if we just can keep it to 4 or 5 minutes in this next section so we don't fall behind even more. But I'm really looking forward to hear your sharing about Mobicom's activities in the last couple of weeks. Mr. Hamada, over to you.
Hi, thank you very much for inviting me to panel discussion. And my name is Tatsuya Hamada, Mobicom CEO. I've been here in Mongolia for over 4 years already. I came from Japan, actually. And, everybody had first experience in this catastrophic crisis by COVID. And the economy, lifestyle, everything was affected hugely. And through such experience, I think there was a lesson learned already. And especially in corporate side, on business operation, we had quite a lot of, in a sense, improvement and development. So I think it was a kind of important turning point for our business operation, I think. So during the peak period of COVID, I would say in Mongolia, just earlier Alex explained that considerably better than I think other countries. In city area, there is no infection reported yet, only one person in the past. And however, returning from other countries, the Mongolian peoples have a lot of infection. But I would say totally so far, current government controlling very well. And then between Russia and China, infected persons number is quite low. So however, in such circumstances, we as a business operator, especially telecom operator, who has responsibility to take care of social and life infrastructure, we needed to take action drastically. One thing is that not the physical security for our employee, but also we really focus on the psychological safetyness, because we are serving for thousands customers in nationwide, that in order to serve safely, of course, our employees' secureness and psychological comfortability, let's say, is a really key factor. So that during the peak period, we had to quite often organize the executive committee meeting and the emergency committee meeting, then quite often communicated with the local staff and the, let's say, remote areas staff and the shop staff, employees, one by one. Then timely, we try to give quick instruction and guidance and appropriate explanation. By doing so, I think our employees felt somehow felt a little bit comfortable and they could get rid of anxiety a lot. That was an important factor, one I need to touch on. And another point is that, in order to give a secure and a safe environment to work, we considered flex time working hours. And, depending on their family's conditions and the job situation, we gave the kind of flexibility to all employees about flex time working. Some people could start working from 7 o'clock, some of staff could start from 10 or 11 o'clock, having a core time. Then by giving such flexibility, I think, our employee could somehow much more pay attention to family care, and also, they felt comfortable even in severe circumstances, I think. And another point is that immediately once this coronavirus news started, we decided to procure 80,000 masks. Yes, actually, honestly speaking, in Mongolia, there was not so strong culture to wear a mask, even for flu or cold, right? But, I'm Japanese and I have such a habit and the customs in Japan. Mm-hmm. That's why, together with my executive teams, working together with our headquarters in Tokyo, KDDI, 80,000 masks we procured in February, and step by step, of course. Then prioritizing our frontline staff, then distribute masks in the shop, definitely, wearing a mask to serve the customer. Such kind of a quick action, quick decision was, I think, psychologically giving comfortability and stability for our employee, I think. And also another point is that we gave her some pay leave for the employee who has really small kids, and also especially for the lady who has pregnancy, and we gave her much flexibility with the pay leave. And we didn't force to work even flex time. And we prioritize their decision first rather than company's decision. Such a flexibility was quite important, and it was a really important turning point for us to consider for business operations. Mm. Yeah, I think time is running.
Yeah. No, but thank you so much. With all the, I think we'll hear you again a little bit later. But I think that was a very nice summary. And I think hearing, starting from flex time, but then also really extending those measures to actual paid leave for those employees that need it the most, which I'm sure made a huge difference for them in how they experienced this crisis. And I think as such, really showing a great example on tackling these challenges. I would like to move on to hear from Ellen a little bit, because I think you have looked at, in particular, at kind of employer-supported childcare solution, and if you could share with us a little bit on what you have seen, how these were used or applied during COVID-19, and maybe if and how they could potentially create an element of support for the workers most affected by this crisis.
Thank you so much. It was actually really interesting hearing from Mr. Hamada and his examples, because many of those best practices are things that we're looking at with our clients across this region. And similar to Mr. Vin, actually, in Fiji, we conducted a survey of some of the largest companies that we're working with to understand how they're responding in this crisis and what kind of support those organisations needed. And we were focusing very much on the topic of childcare, but also on gender-based violence as two topics that we were very interested in. But actually the first thing, Inez, we looked at was recommending that businesses seek alternatives to retrenching staff and to be really responsible about those decisions that they make around retrenchment. So considering different options like partial pay and different leave arrangements. But secondly, and more closely on the childcare question you asked, last year when we launched a report in Fiji on tackling childcare, we found that flexible working was the number one childcare related benefit that parents were seeking at the time. But back then, no one was really offering flexible work arrangements, particularly in Fiji. So this has actually been a really interesting catalyst for change. Now we find that the majority of businesses who are able to are offering flexible work or working from home arrangements. But to ensure that these are effective and productive, there's certain things that companies have done to try and tweak those flexible work offerings and make it more effective. So for example, some companies are supporting their employees with an allowance for internet connectivity, for example, to ensure that they can connect to the systems that they require, the tools of trade they require. Other organisations are supporting their employees with parenting skills and remote learning for children. We mentioned, I think Sa mentioned in Myanmar, there is not online homeschooling. In Fiji, it's kind of similar. So some companies were supporting their employees to have access to the office and print off school material, photocopy material, so that they could actually continue to learn. The other thing that we found was that some companies were putting in place split shifts. So to facilitate social distancing, they were splitting out their employees into 2 different shifts, for example. The other thing, which is also similar to what Mr. Hamada was saying, was companies are really trying to focus, in addition to flexible work, on safe systems of work to allow their employees to work really safely at this time. Which includes things like protective equipment, which he mentioned, and also counselling services. So we have some clients who are offering counselling services to help their employees and support employees affected by COVID or, suffering other issues related to financial stress and anxiety and this kind of thing. But something else that hasn't come up, which is something we think is rather important, is around respectful workplace policies. Now we know that gender-based violence increases during these kind of public health emergencies and other crises as well, like the tropical cyclone I mentioned earlier. But this gender-based violence can include things like customer and client aggression. People are getting frustrated and annoyed when they're in a customer service environment. There can be workplace bullying and sexual harassment, which increases at this time. Sexual exploitation and abuse, which mentioned earlier, as well as domestic violence. So what we're seeing, and what's been really impressive, is that companies in Fiji are putting in place policies to encourage employees to raise issues and report incidents that they witness or hear about. So this is something that's really very important. And I guess I'll finish just by saying that the key thing here for all businesses is to seek continuous improvement and feedback from their employees on what they're experiencing, what are their needs, what are their challenges, and how can they continue to check in that the benefits and support they're providing are still working and that they are evolving or adapting the response to suit the evolving kind of context as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing all these points. I was making some notes on all these good practices that companies have put in place, and as you say, it's quite encouraging to see. And I'm actually really happy that we have today on our panel Alice, who is talking on behalf of her company, who is running a factory in the south of China, and who we know has put in place what we can call a child-friendly space or a family-friendly space already a couple of years back. In kind of context, I think, Alice, of the of your membership with the ICTI ethical toy program, and which really has put you on the path of becoming a family-friendly policy. And I'm really excited to have you on to share a little bit how your factory has been dealing with the challenges in COVID-19 and how measures such as this family-friendly space that you guys have put in place can maybe help to deal with some of these challenges, even during a pandemic. So Alice, if I can hand over to you and let you share a little bit.
Thanks, Ines, and hello everyone. I'm going to share what our factory is doing in southern China to help our workers and their families during COVID. Like Mr. Hamada and Alan have been mentioning earlier, we also try to offer flexibility to our workers as much as possible after the COVID. For those eager to resume work earlier, we offer them a safe, sterilized working environment with adequate PPE, like facial mask provided. And for those workers who wish to stay home for a longer time, probably because they have to take care of their kids, because of the lockdown, school have not yet resumed, we just allowed them to either work from home for those office workers, or they allow them to report to duty according to their own needs. We also try to help our workers to buy PPE for their families through our company procurement channels. But in addition to these, I would say more immediate measures, we think catering for their deeper needs is also important. In recent years, we have tried different projects to help our workers, like women empowerment projects and family-friendly space project. What we observe is our staff loved all these programs a lot, and we actually receive overwhelming response from them. Today, I'm going to focus on the family-friendly space program, which we think is also really helpful during these difficult times. And our program has been implemented since 2017 with CCR, CSRs and ICTI helps. So what family-friendly space is all about? They're actually about helping the parents to bring their kids along and stay with them, no matter whether it is every day or it's just during a short summer break. So I think in China, most of our workers are migrant workers. So they work very hard for their families, especially for their kids. But ironically, the kids are usually left behind at hometown. So it is always a dilemma for the Chinese parents, especially for the women, to decide whether to leave and earn more money for their families or to stay and take care of their kids. And I think the family-friendly space program is exactly actually provide a very good assistance to our workers to have a solution to work while having their kids to stay with them. So I'm going to talk about the family-friendly space first. So this is for the kids who are left behind at home during the school terms. So what we're doing is we offer a 1 month whole day program to the families. So we hire teachers to come to our factory. So the parents would bring their kids from home to the southern China, and then they just while they're coming back to the factory to work, they bring their kids along, and the kids will be taken care by the teachers the whole day. So we design beautiful courses to them so that the kids will not get bored, they can learn things, and we can safeguard their safety so that the parents don't need to lock the kids in the country. And what's more, our very responsible teachers have been adding elements into the courses, helping the families to flourish the long missing bonds. Because for those left behind kids, they have a very loose tie with their parents because usually they can only meet once or twice a year. So that we have recorded a lot of touching moments in the past 3 years project. And right after the child-friendly spaces project, we then think about, oh, maybe we can also offer after-school care program for those kids who are fortunate enough to stay with with their parents. So we can actually help our workers to bring the kids along and stay with them. So we hire part-time teachers to take care of the children after school and offer them free tutorials and taking care of the kids while our workers are still working. They still they have not yet because usually our workers have to work OT overtime, right? So this program could greatly ease our workers' pressure as they don't need to worry about the children's safety, and also it will allow them to have a much better quality time with the kids after work. And this year with the COVID, we think this program is even more important for our work because they would like to see the kids being kept in a safe place while they of course they really want the kids to stay with them. And we have already resumed our after-school care program after the COVID, and we have successfully maintained a hygienic and safe environment for the children. And so we are now looking forward to seeing all the kids joining our family-friendly space program in the summer.
Thank you so much, Alice, for sharing this. And I think I was, to be honest, when I heard about you guys running the program also this summer, despite potentially the additional work it creates for you with all the hygiene measures that you will have to take, etc. But knowing that how important it is going to be for the families. And I've also heard that they particularly appreciate because it also helps their kids who might have been lagging behind in school to get some support from teachers, etc., to get back on track. So creating a real important addition to maybe close a little bit of that gap that we have seen between the children in more affluent situations and potentially the children of kind of frontline workers. So thank you so much for sharing this. I would like if just to, I think these were such good examples from Mr. Hamada and Ellen shared and what you shared what companies can do. And I know that in the last couple of weeks, UN organizations have worked really hard to create guidance around that. I don't know, Alex, if you can share a few guidances. I can maybe add a few things as well, but I think there is quite a bit out there that can help and lead businesses or support them at least in some of these endeavors.
Yes, indeed. It's a rapidly developing area of work with guidance coming out. A joint publication, UNICEF, ILO, UN Women, was recently launched around family-friendly policies and good practices in the workspace. And also next week, we expect another guidance note, a handbook from UNICEF around family-friendly policies for businesses. And I understand that all these documents will be made available, of course, to all the participants within the coming days and weeks ahead.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And I'm actually know that there is another guidance in working as well, particularly aimed at the garment sector, together with ILO Better Work, that will also address some of these key COVID-19 sessions. I think it's also just about to come out in the next couple of days or weeks. And I see there is a link already on the family-friendly policies COVID-19 guidance that is already available, and I think these other resources will be made available soon. So thanks so much, Alex, for this. Now, whenever I'm involved in helping to write or develop these guidances, there is always a side of me that feels a little bit bad towards the business, because I'm like, oh, we have all those ideas and all those shoulds, and you could do that and you could do that, knowing that already in normal times, it's not that easy for business to get that involved. It's absolutely necessary, but it's really not that easy. And particularly now during COVID-19, I think it's even harder as business themselves are facing so many challenges. So I would like to give the word again to Mr. Vin and Alice and Mr. Hamada, one after the other. But if you can just very short, maybe really in just like a half a minute, tell us, what do you think is the main motivation for businesses to make that, go that extra mile, to make that extra step and to find those extra solutions that clearly need resources, but what is the key motivation for business to go there? Mr. Vinh, would you like to share what you have seen in Vietnam's business environment?
Yes, that it is very critical for BCCI and as a representative of the private sector in Vietnam. And we see the FFP, the friendly policy guidance has played a significant role in coping with the difficulty. It's we can say that it's unprecedented time. And we have to face with those difficulties, and business community in Vietnam is in readiness to work with different partners, government, the national, the UN in Vietnam, UN organization in Vietnam to overcome the difficulty. And BCCI, we understand that we always show our effort to create, good working environment to our staff and our member company in Vietnam, to do the same through the very good FFP practices, such as create flexible work arrangement. Work from home, during the social distancing. It's difficult time, but we need to know how to find a way to overcome that and to access and understand the staff family condition and to support them in terms of working condition and during the social distancing time, and to promote good hygiene and in our at workplace, and especially in collaboration with UNICEF in Vietnam, BCCI is implementing the following intervention. Later this year, BCCI will be scaling UNICEF parenting training program, and with the company by holding a training facilitator. And we know that working parents have to struggle with the balance between work and family responsibility, especially during the unusual time. And BCCI also aim to bring together various key stakeholders in Vietnam, especially the ICT sector, to discuss the key finding of assessment of close gap on skill for employability, with the focus on the managerial young people. And never before we have seen the price children and family have to pay due to the digital divide or lack of digital skill. And I heard that in some country there is not enough facility and even computer for the pupil, so that for the students that very difficult. So I think that the family friendly workplace solution. So in effort in enabling staff to protect and care themselves to their children and enhance worker productivity and the sense of security. So that we have planned to do in collaboration with different key stakeholders in Vietnam, especially with UNICEF.
Thank you so much, Vinh, for this summary and all the activities. And I've really have seen you and in many meetings and conferences in Vietnam, really advocating with businesses for taking those steps and becoming more and more family friendly. And we've seen how it resonates. And as you say, I think many businesses see how it can actually help them with increasing productivity. I was just on a call with a factory, I think 2 days ago in Bangladesh, and they were part of a project very similar to the one that UNICEF is running in Vietnam with UNICEF. And they've said this interesting thing, that because previously they were part in this family friendly policy, business and child rights project, and in that context, they had started to work within the factory on hygiene measures, both for the workers inside the factories, but also training the workers and giving them things like soap and training to keep up good hygiene at home. And they said it was like a miracle, because now they were totally prepared for facing all the requirements the government came and asked them during COVID-19. And so basically before they knew that this was going to come, they started this measure just in their context of their family-friendly policies within their factories. So I thought it was really interesting to see that family-friendly policies can actually even prepare businesses a bit better to those challenges. We actually do have a question that goes to Alice and exactly on that topic, and I think it's good because we're in the time of Q&A, so I kind of lead this over, and we have one for Mr. Hamada as well on that point. So Alice, the attendee is asking, and if you have any data or any research that you guys made or that was made over the last 3 years that gives you or shows you what the program that you guys have been running, what the impact was on worker satisfaction, productivity, also reputation, and your worker retention. So has your factory been able to observe any of those kind of business impacts?
We didn't really have a very clear data showing how the family-friendly profitability or the staff turnaround, because from all the participants, they are already parents. So we usually regard those groups of workers. So I mean, for the turnover rate, we didn't really see much difference, but we see a much happier workforce. And we have face-to-face interviews with our parents workers, and they are so touched and even have their tears roll down and they're commenting on how the program could help them. And also we record a very high parent satisfaction on the parents on the family-friendly space. Like for the first year we have this program, the parent satisfaction is 93%, which is very high for most of the benefits program. You know, usually for a normal HR style, 70%, 60% is already a norm. Right? 93% is really a very good result. And in the next year we have 98% parent satisfaction. So we do see that this program could really help us to build our relationship and trust with our group.
Thank you so much. And I think in the context, and I think your factory has been part of that when IATP, when they looked at the impact, they did actually see some positive, at least some positive indication on intended retention. That workers say, I want to stay longer, and generally kind of more motivated workforce. And I think what was really interesting is that in some cases it even swapped over to those workers that are not directly the beneficiaries of the program.
Yes, yeah. We have an interview with a single workers who is single, so she didn't really bring the kids with them, but she gave a very high rating on the program because they feel that our company is doing a really good thing for workers, and they recognize this a lot, even though they are not taking part in the program.
Great, thanks so much, Alice, for sharing this. Mr. Hamada, there was an attendee who was asking, very impressed by your performance and what you guys have been doing in Mongolia, and the question was like, what motivated you? What was the trigger for you to engage so much and to put significant resources into supporting your employees during that COVID-19 crisis?
Yeah, thank you for a great question. But I might answer for your question from different angle. Somehow we are working for telecommunication companies and using digital IT technology, right? And gradually, following the digital technology development, business style, social style, lifestyle, all of those are gradually changing for that digital transformation. Means from physical contact society to more non-physical contact society we are heading for, I think, in the business style, operation, whatever it is. Then I think this COVID was accelerating such trend more and more. And then particularly, schools of cooperation, business operations of the people has to work, people has to study at home, people has to enjoy at home somehow, even entertainment, using network or non-contact, communication. So that in this sense, I think as a telecom operator, which has responsibility to make communication smoother, I think our responsibility was so much increased more and more, because communication itself is really important to avoid isolation of humanity and also avoidance of social too much distance, right? Certain level of social distance is okay, but too much distance is not good for humanity, I think. That's why, in this sense, our motivation of our telecom business is we are, supporting society itself of human. That's why we do our best, and this is our responsibility and motivation trigger.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing. And I think luckily or hopefully that is really a trend, right? And it's not just Mobicom in Mongolia, and we know that there's a lot of other companies going in that direction as well. But we also know that there is still a lot of companies out there that maybe have not seen that trend, or also probably think a little bit think a bit more short term. So one question that maybe Mr. Hamada, if I have you on, you can also help to answer, that came in, and it's around mental health support, where they were asking, what can business really do for mental health support? Isn't that something that potentially also goes beyond what business can do? Who is going to help families, for example, and that have been affected by domestic violence? Maybe you can first answer from your business perspective, and then later we can maybe turn to UN perspective.
That's a bit difficult to answer quickly. Yes, I think in order to avoid such a negative factor like domestic violence or sexual harassment, whatever it is, that's activity, maybe communication is anyway important. Less communication makes kind of misleading for human being for different direction, I think. That's why in current circumstances, people have quite a huge distance from each other, I think. And however, such distance may cause psychologically negative affection and direction. That's why I think even, we need to have a social distance, so stay home and keep distance from, many people. But I think as long as a human, that is also an important factor to be the part of a big society. Then, in order to do so, the communication is important. And from viewpoint of our business, smoother communication, easy communication, and plus less cost communication is a quite important factor to provide the customer. Of course, as long as the business, we cannot make it everything free of charge, but certain level of reasonable level, and then we need to provide. By doing so, communication will be accelerated, even current circumstances. Then by doing so, I think, people may have a good direction to behave in daily life, I think.
Thank you so much. And obviously, I think it shows where you can support and where you can try to give all the potential, like the best starting points actually for your employees as well to succeed through enabling this communication. I don't know, Sarah, maybe you can see from UN Women's perspective. Do you have any thoughts on how companies could support women who, for example, are affected by either domestic violence or just families that are generally affected by mental health issues during that time?
Yes, thank you very much. I mean, I think Mr. Hamada already highlighted some of the really key points that we would see as very good practices for companies when it comes to gender-based violence. I mean, I think that once companies recognize that what's happening to their employees at home is impacting their work, and these are things that really need to be spoken out about. And I think that managers and leaders in the private sector can act as role models in talking about the issue and recognizing that it shouldn't be a hidden issue, that it needs to be spoken about, and in providing practical information to their staff about where to go for help. And also there have been some good examples of, for example, providing referral towards services, information about services, and also providing mutual support groups among colleagues as well, which I think can be effective in the case of dealing with stress, dealing with some of the very real mental health issues that come up during this time, as well as with GBV in general. And just to mention that the tool that we shared from UN Women that's been shared with the audience, which is something to really help private sector companies very practically apply some gender principles in their work, which is based on our women's empowerment principles, does include this among other areas for employers to look at. And it's been very much adapted to this COVID situation, doing something that can be used quite rapidly. So I really encourage people to take a look at that as well for more ideas. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So one of the questions that we got, which I think is very interesting, I'm not quite sure who I should pass it on to, so if anyone wants to jump in. And so basically the question was, if a company or factory they struggle financially already in that time, being that the time is so difficult, how can they afford to implement such measures that are of extra support, like a CSR or COVID-19 response? Are there any resources available to them, or how do you think companies like that can deal with these measures? Don't know if anybody wants to volunteer. You can just unmute yourself and speak up.
Can I?
Yes, of course you can.
Apart from Vietnam Chamber of Commerce and Industry, at the request of the Prime Minister of Vietnam, we are making a report to be submitted to the Prime Minister every month and to the government every quarter. So during the last over 6 months, we gather on the opinion of the businesses in Vietnam. Especially we listen to the difficulty and the voice of the small and medium-sized enterprises to find out what they are in which kind of difficult position they are, and based on that, or on the paper and the letter that we are getting from them, we accommodate all the opinion into a report, a PCCI to be sent to the government and the Prime Minister, and we ask the government, the Central Bank of Vietnam, the Ministry of Finance, the Customs, and all the relevant authority to kind of design a package to support businesses in difficult time, in terms of later payment of tax, or you can transfer the tax payment into later time, or more easy access to the credit of the bank, the bank loan, and all the things that we are doing a lot of things to reduce the level of difficulty of the businesses in Vietnam in almost all sectors. So we are quite positive that the government and the employees and even the employers at the same side, on the same boat. So we need to support each other to overcome, this difficult, very, very extremely difficult time in Vietnam.
Yeah, thank you so much, Vin, for sharing this. And I think it's great to see how you in Vietnam are taking this role to supporting all businesses. And we've actually seen how this really helps companies to keep going. We've just been doing parenting training for factories in Vietnam in the last couple of weeks to support the families, where the factory was ready to do that, saying, okay, we don't have so much work, so let's use the time to give extra support for our factories. And I thought, what a positive messaging from that factory to not just say, oh, sorry guys, no work, but okay, we don't have too much work, maybe there's not so much time to do or so much opportunity to do overtime, but what we can do is give you extra support in that time. So I thought that's very positive and can be seen. And I think throughout our experiences and what I've heard from now all the participants in the last 1.5 hours, it's really so clear that obviously even now in this time, a lot of times it's what we prioritize. And while businesses cannot solve all those challenges that we've heard and all those challenges that we've seen in the beginning of this session that are really grave, I think we see with the positive examples that we've been discussing now in the last half an hour that business can make a difference. And I think more than ever, this is important now. And through the last 10 years, we've actually so often I've seen that businesses can be very effective, very quick, and sometimes even reach areas where maybe companies cannot. I know we would have had so many more questions that came in from participants, and as well as actually lots of interesting things that the panelists still could have shared, but we're kind of at the end of our session today. Before I'm totally concluding, we would like to show a short video that has just been put together from UNICEF, whom, by the way, I really want to give a shout out for setting up that session, for inviting all the participants and making sure that the impact on children is, and what business can do to make this a positive impact, is on the agenda every day. So thanks very much to UNICEF for setting this up. And I would like to, it's just a 2-minute video, right? Like all participants and attendees to watch this video with us. It's a call to action that I think can only inspire us. So please, to our facilitator, if you don't mind. thanks so much for showing this. And if you've been reading and listening to the session, I think it felt very much like it was summarizing the session we had. And we only got this video just a few minutes before our session. So I think it puts it really much to the point on how much we can work together and how much it's necessary for us to all work together and to do whatever we can in our positions to somehow mitigate that immense impact this crisis have. And hopefully we do build better, we do come out of this stronger, and maybe use this as a chance to create better supply chains, to create more family-friendly companies, etc. So thank you all for this session. Thanks so much to all the panelists and so much for all the attendees for staying with us. And I hope it was interesting and could inspire some action that will change some people's lives. Thanks everyone, and have a really nice rest of the day.